Welcome to Make Your Money Matter. I'm your host, Brad Barrett. Hey, let's talk inflation. If you look at inflation right now, and really what our data has shown is inflation is, I'm going to call it pivoting. It started to decline, both the headline CPI and the preferred measure, the personal consumption expenditure CPE, and it's taking into account the inherent lags in shelter, which honestly, we believe inflation is lower than the reported data. And if you look at a lot of economic research that's out there, many of you've read, that's probably a lot lower than what they're even reporting. So it's not as bad, I think, as what we're seeing. But the concern going forward is the Fed tightening too much. We've all been seeing that, and still a concern. And as you likely heard me talk about inflation, it's really a two-step process. There's the general rise of goods and services, but there's also the money supply because it's a demand side. There's too much money in the system. So you're going to get people out there fetching the higher prices. They're going to get those higher prices because there's too much money in the system. So with this stat though, the money supply growth has finally turned negative. So as money supply growth has collapsed, and we also have supply chain issues that have pretty much, for the most part, returned to pre-pandemic norms, goods inflation, if you look at just goods, continues to decline pretty rapidly. So the one thing I want to share from our data here at One Capital is, remember, there's different types. That there's core, there's headline, there's ones that include or exclude certain things, and they matter to us as economists here for us as we look and as we manage at our portfolios and finding out which ones and which sectors or industries make the most sense for our clients to be in. Now, the Fed could inadvertently over-tighten, which essentially would result in profit margins for companies across the board getting squeezed, which then leads into layoffs and ultimately taking wage inflation back down. So this is kind of a ripple effect. That's why we're not concerned, but cognizant, I should say, of what's happening with the Fed and if they're going to over-tighten or not. Because when you over-tighten, you're basically making stuff too expensive to a point where people, you and I, are going to stop producing. And if you stop producing, then you don't have the need for the jobs. You start laying off people to keep your profit margins and your company in check, and so on and so forth. So that's what we're looking at when it comes to inflation. So you think, what's keeping inflation at its current levels? Well, as I mentioned, it's jobs, lots of jobs. The US economy created 4.8 million jobs in 2022. And yet there, for some reason, are still an abundance of open positions at US employers. At the end of last year, get this stat, there were about 1.7 job openings for each unemployed American. Think on that for a second. Now, the total number of unemployed was essentially unchanged at 5.7 million as of January of this year, 2023, and non-farm payroll employment rose by 517,000 in January. Jobs growth was widespread in January, led by gains in really the leisure and hospitality sectors. Essentially, they were hiring people back from the pandemic. There was professional and business services that added about 82,000. Healthcare added about 58,000. So employment also increased in things like government, partially reflecting in the return of university workers from a lot of the strikes that have been going on. But the stubborn wage inflation is really what I want to share today, is really what remains the battle. It's the final holdout, if you will. Compensation costs for we'll call it civilian workers increased about 5.1% for the 12-month period ending in December of 2022. This, by the way, is just to give you some context. It's compared with an increase of 4% ending December of 21. Wage growth and unemployment costs have not durably slowed, as my point in saying this. And again, a sticky source of inflation. And here's the fact that I want to get across here. When wage growth exceeds 4%, we consider it, and most economists consider it, inflationary. And the major challenge, I think, going forward is getting wages down to the Fed's target inflation of around 2%. I hope you found that helpful. Make sure to subscribe to the channel and always remember, make your money matter.